podcast about the game of life and the hero's journey we all experience. Let's jump in with our host, Dylan Watkins, as he introduces today's guest.
What up, what up, what up? Are you interested in improving yourself? What about making it easier or better to help the people in the lives that you care about the most? Well, on today's podcast, I have Brian Ford. He is the founder of the podcast Self-Improvement Daily, which has earned over 16 million downloads to date. He's also the co-founder For Purpose, a social impact agency, building movements that help people plug into making a difference. So without any delay, I'd like to welcome Brian. Hey.
What up, Dylan? I love the intro. It makes me feel special.
You are special, man. You are special.
Thanks, brother. You are too.
Yeah, dude. Like, here's the thing, man. I have massive respect for people that try to improve themselves and then try to improve the lives of people around them, right? That's all the whole heroic philosophy thing is, right? Is you try to be better so that you can do more, right? So I'm excited to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Let's jam.
Yeah. And as a fellow podcaster, I'd like to first kick things off. We talk about this whole Self-Improvement Daily podcast. Can you give us a little bit of background that kind of led you up to the journey that is your podcast?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the journey that led me to the podcast was more of a personal journey that was my discovery of self of sorts. So I was a former student athlete, captain, grew up in an affluent neighborhood and just kind of had a really easy and successful childhood, and it kind of built an identity within me that, I was a stud, I was always going to excel. And that persisted through college where, I won student athlete of the year for my school. And I had, honor roll, dean's list kind of accolades academically. And, I was kind of on the fast track and everyone kind of saw me as that kind of guy. And then life hit and I left college and I went into the workforce. And I started failing and I started being worse than people around me. And I started not being good enough or at least meeting the expectations I'd set for myself. And that was really starting to threaten the identity that I'd cultivated for so many years of, hey, Brian, you're the stud, you're this guy, you're on the fast track, you're getting it done. And then I was interfacing with a reality, which was not quite that in the moment, which is, hey, man, like you're human and your talent's only going to take you so far and you got to figure your stuff out. So that's really kind of where I found, an identity crisis of sorts, or I should say kind of an identity conflict of my own related to who is Brian? Is he this guy that is on the fast track and the star athlete and the great student and, going to do big things with his life? And I had some social impact background at that time too. It's like, man, this guy's making a difference. He's doing big things. Or am I the guy that's struggling to close a sale because, I was in a role that I hadn't prepared for and, was underqualified for, to be honest, right? So like I had this identity crisis and I figured, well, if I'm going to try and build myself back up, who do I want to build myself to be? Like if I am at the bottom and rediscovering or redefining who I am, well, let me create the best, most heroic version of myself. And that's where I leaned into self-improvement, personal development, and figuring out who are the people that are sitting in the chair that I want to be in, who have it figured out, who I respect, who I admire, who I'm inspired by, and start reading their books, listening to their podcasts, and figuring it out for myself. And at that point, I was encouraged to start making content and building a personal brand. And honestly, it started on LinkedIn where I was just sharing my woes as a young professional. And I built an audience on LinkedIn as just kind of being vulnerable. Like, hey, these are the things I'm thinking about. These are the things I'm learning. And it's cringy to look back at it now because like I had no idea what I was talking about. But that's kind of the point too, is to be able to document some of those things. And then the content on LinkedIn led me to, start a podcast. And I was like, well, if I'm going to start a podcast, or at that point, actually, you'll like this. At that point, it was actually, I wanted to learn the audio marketing space, talk about Amazon Alexa and stuff where it's voice first marketing. Gary Vaynerchuk, was really bullish. I'm like, oh, this is the future. Like you got to get in on this. And I was like, all right, if I'm going to learn something, maybe I learn audio marketing. And I was like, well, the best way to do that, especially as an Amazon Alexa flash briefing is a daily show. So like, cool, I'll make daily audio content. I like self-improvement. Let's call it Self-Improvement Daily. And that is when my podcast was born, just as an experiment and accountability for my own self-growth. And then it's grown from there.
I love you have this journey, right? So if you look at the hero's journey, you left some village, some place you would be familiar with, right? Which was your childlike life, right? Got into the quote unquote real world and you realize, oh, okay, who do I want to be if I'm going to remake myself? And there's kind of this identity crisis that we have when we shift, when we live one community and we bring into another one, which is, from high school or wherever to workforce. And what I like about this is you took this path of saying, how do I sign up for something that improves me in a certain way, but I can also, it has multiple benefits, which I think Tim Ferriss calls this like the key domino, right? You do one type of activity, but it has multiple benefiting effects, right? So you're being accountable for sharing online. You're learning and growing at the same time. You're developing your voice, and I think that's great. Could you talk to me just a little bit about when did you start it? How far are you along on that journey so far with the Self Improvement Daily?
Yeah, so I started it in 2018. It's actually funny. The day that I started it was the day that I met my fiance. So just like a weird, like divine day of my life. But that was in April of 2018. And
Wow.
this really started as me uploading my first 2-minute episode. That was a reflection. I think it was on why you should change your laptop password to an affirmation. It's like, oh, because then you're priming yourself with that thing. And I had no idea what manifestation even was, the law of attraction was at that point. I was like, oh, I read this. I'm going to share it, you know? But yeah, and that's kind of where it started. And it's in the format of the podcast. It's 2 to 3 minutes every single day. And it's been that way for almost 5 years. From April, like 5 years. Yeah, I mean, in the throes of all of that, I never expected to grow an audience. I was just really sharing for that experiment of learning the audio marketing space. And then, 6 months, 9 months into it, I looked up and I was like, oh, are people listening to this? I checked downloads for the first time and I had thousands of people listening. It's like, really? Wait, who are these people? How'd they find it? This is cool. And then it's gone from there.
That's awesome, man, because you're on the journey. And sometimes it's not checking. It's really important when you first get started, because then people, they want that initial feedback. There's this thing that happens. I don't know if you've noticed this, like you get some sort of idea, some sort of identity, some sort of way you want to be, right? And instead of putting in the hard work, you go and tell somebody about it, which then gives you validation, which then kind of removes the desire and the need to make that thing happen, right? So you do that, you're like, oh, I got this amazing business idea, or I'm gonna do this, and then you isn't this cool, seeking validation, and it removes that desire. It kind of pulls. Have you seen that happen in your life, and or because I'm really curious about if you've done the Self Improvement Daily. There's moments like I've had in my podcast that are mind blowing. I go, oh my God, that's so insightful, and I integrate that into my life of who I am.
Sure.
So can you talk just a little bit about both those things?
Yeah, no, and I think there's a third thing to touch on too, but to directly answer what you're saying, the first point, the first piece of advice that I give when someone's starting a podcast, because you have a podcast, people are just gonna ask you, how do you do it, and what should I do, right? And the first thing I say is, you don't put any expectations on people listening to it. Like, you need to earn their respect, especially when you think of the way that people invest in listening to podcasts. It's not like a social media account where you can just kind of scroll and move through. Like, people are going to invest 30 minutes with you if they're like really going to like want to learn from you, right? And there's a high bar to that. So you have to prove it. You have to be consistent over a number of different weeks, months, whatever it might be. It's a different animal, right? So yes, I've found that there are a lot of people, kind of the retention or the churn of podcasters are just, it's unfortunate because a lot of people don't get the result that they expected, but they didn't give themselves the time for that, result to mature, and for the podcast itself to mature in terms of the message. But what you're mentioning, which I think is a really interesting parallel to kind of just another concept that I've been fascinated about, is it's called the clarity paradox that Greg McKeown has shared. And I don't think it was any of his books, but it's something that he shared, which is basically kind of, what does clarity do in business, and how does it actually become the thorn that cuts you at the end too? So it's, the mission is to get clear, right? So the first step is you have some clarity, and when you get clear, then you start getting results, right? So the more clear you are, the better results you get. But then once you start attracting results, then new opportunities start flooding your way, which then prevents you from staying as clear and prevents you from getting the results moving forward. So what happens is your clarity actually serves as this cycle of then being interrupted or distracted by new opportunities that come, which then it steers you away from being able to succeed and remain clear, because it has this kind of almost like feedback loop, or this opportunity loop that just really starts to bias and muddy the waters of your clarity, which is the direct the direct input of your success. So anyway, the clarity paradox is fascinating.
What's interesting about that is you look at that in terms of like the hero's journey format, right? There's two pieces of it. One, I'd call that a threshold guarding, something that really tests you on the path and goes, are you really committed to this journey? But usually that's when it kicks the crap out of you, right? There's some sort of kick the crap out of you kind of thing. I don't know, maybe you're trying the podcast out and then you're on, and then you get burnt on the podcast. You can't think of what to say. You freak out. You get embarrassed. Whatever happens. That's more of a threshold guardian. There's this temptress, and I can't think of the name of it. I don't know if anybody knows the name of it on the path, where along the way you get seduced off the path, right? Where it's like, oh, I think I'm going great. And it's like, well, do you really want to go that way? Come this way. It's easier. It's warmer. But it's not the actual true mission. And it's interesting how the parallels with the hero's journey and self-improvement along the path. As you've been going along this, what it's been like, because I've had my aha moments. For you, what are some those aha moments inside of doing the podcast that have really kind of changed your mindset or your perspective on self-improvement?
Yeah. I mean, I think I already alluded to one of them, but it's listening back to what I was thinking about and how I was relating with things 5 years ago, and to be like, whoa, that was me. And, how much have I grown? How much have I learned since then? Right. So it almost allows you to have that perspective to really witness the progress that you've made. And also, it's not that that was wrong at the time and you're right now. It's just all about the context. Right. So it gives you a little more space to consider kind of the space between the notes, so to speak. Like there's like the symphony in music isn't about the sounds. It's about the space between the notes that makes the music. Right. So it's like you're able to see some of those nuanced pieces as the time has passed, to be able to figure out that, like, oh, the context here is different. And that's why I'm relating with this differently, or whatever it might be. So I'd say that's one of kind of like the best benefits, is just a kind of here and then or here and now kind of relationship between who I was and who I am. And then the other is just because I used to do interviews, and I got to interview Greg McKeown. Right. And it's just like, these are people, like I just realized, like, oh, they write the books and they're on the stages and they're doing these things. And then they're on a Zoom having technical issues just like anyone else might. And it's like, this guy's a human. This woman is human. It's like, what's keeping me from being like them? So it's very encouraging to get to that next level, like to access that next level, and then to see what it looked like. Sure, talent and articulation, great, but also the realities of it are like very human. And it was encouraging to me to see, like, oh, I'm not that far off. I can stay on my path and I can get there.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that. And there are sometimes in the podcast when I've interviewed people that I feel like they are humans that operate at a different level, right? And then I'm just like, oh wow, this is a different type of human. And but they had a path, they had a pathway of how they got there along that. I had a guy who was a neuroscientist talking about everything is just consciousness, and space-time reality is not fundamentally true. It's just everything is universal consciousness. And I'm just like, I had like 4 hours of sleep. I'm just like, oh, this guy is so smart. I'm just trying to like hold on for dear life, but I could feel like just by being around those people, though, it shifts your brain. And yes, they are people, but they've been able to kind of, certain people have reached a level of expertise in whatever they're at, whether it's physical fitness or psychology or whatever it might be, that it feels like they see the world differently than we do. Right. And I feel like I'm very curious about, because you've been on the grind for a while too. It's like, people often want tactics. Like they're like, hey, tell me, how do I improve my life, or how do I make $1 billion, or but a lot of it really, the origins of that is that mindset, that perceptual shift that you get. And a lot of the ways you get that is through talking to these human folks that seem to do inhuman things. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's something that I've really had to own over time, is I don't want to be the next Tim Ferriss, or I don't want to be the next Dave Meltzer as a mentor of mine, right? So it's like, I don't want to be the next version of these guys. I want to be my own self, but I can incorporate their learnings, and I don't need to come up with anything that's completely original. What I have to say about my understanding of these core universal concepts is original itself. So it's taken the pressure off a little bit that way. And that's where I've been able to try the different tactics and the specific things that they're mentioning, implement it in my life, see how it works. And then that's what I can share and, encourage other people to do, for them to then relate with it and take with it on their own. Right. So it's almost just kind of like you're passing the baton and letting people have more perspective and resources to then figure out what works best for them, which is, when it comes to a tactical level, like the core resources I offer in my coaching are about having the right process and systems and feedback loops in place, so you can figure out and measure what's working, what's not, how did this make me feel, how didn't it make me feel, and then you can start optimizing for yourself, because there's no way to optimize unless unless you have the core infrastructure in place to actually fulfill the process. But that end result with the same process will be far different for one person than it will be for another. So it's a mix of, art and science, right? And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. And that's when I think about that, think of the constraints allow for creativity, right? So you have these frameworks to be able to dance in. And that framework, though, it's not the same process for anybody, but you can follow the process and get a different result, but it puts you on that path. And what it makes me think about too is it's a two-part question, but the first one I want to get answered, and we'll dive into the second one. Part one, you talk about the notes in between the music, and what was coming to mind for me was people finding their voice, people being able to communicate. And I think sometimes it's very difficult to pause, find a voice, be willing to just dive in deep. And a lot of people want to have everything perfect. They want to have everything scripted. They want to have everything laid out. They want to not seem like an idiot online. They don't want to say something stupid or put their foot in their mouths, which I have done on multiple occasions on this podcast.
Then you're doing it right if that's the case. Like you gotta move. You gotta push the boundary.
It's a journey, man. We're on a journey here, and it's okay. But the thing is, like, what's funny about that is like people want to look perfect, but we're attracted to that authentic fuck up, I would say, in terms of going into it. And because people go, oh wow, it's real. You feel that realness of that communication. How do you, because this is the part of the coaching question, but I'm gonna dive into what your coaching looks like. But how do you help people find that voice? How do you get them to detach from just being mimics of their mentors to being themselves?
Ooh. I mean, I think that like kind of the real pandemic we're experiencing is a pandemic of self-worth, So I think it's first being able to love yourself and know that you do have something unique to offer, that you don't need to parrot or rehearse what someone else says. And it's gaining the confidence in that like your contribution and your thoughts matter, So I think there's a self-worth element to it. What came to mind, which is more of an indirect answer to your question, is not necessarily how do you find your voice, but it's how do you avoid that negative voice? How do you prevent that from stopping you from even trying in the first place? And in my mind, that perfectionism, right? You said perfectionism, that's a form of self-sabotage, just like procrastination, just like limiting beliefs, just like negative self-talk, just like rationalization. All of these things are our logical conscious mind trying to create a certain representation or story of how things are that keeps us from taking action. And the reason that happens is because at least my understanding of it, is because there's a disconnect, there's a cognitive dissonance between the identity that you hold and the behaviors that you're engaging in. And if you engage in a behavior that violates your present identity, which is more reserved, it's more quiet, it's something else, then these self-sabotaging tendencies are going to be created from your subconscious mind to prevent your logical conscious actions, right? And that's where perfectionism is self-sabotage, preventing you from taking a new action that violates that identity. So in order for people to like express their voice in themselves, they need to get that other voice out of the way.
So very good point on this. And what makes me think about it is like, I'm an entrepreneur and I've often stepped into fields where I've had no business being, and then I've figured things out along the way. I went in the hospitality space. I jumped into owning a gourmet catering food truck business where I didn't know anything about it, not like the pilots. And I was absolutely an imposter, but then I figured out that there was like this lag effect that over time I then stopped, and I was clearly had the identity of someone who ran it on this because I was absolutely competent in what I did. But I had an incongruency of actually having to figure those things out. And I've done it several other times now in the future. And now I'm in high tech and, the things that we've talked about previously. But how do you get people? You're talking about that self-sabotage, that imperfection, but the people need progress to feel good to a degree. If we don't progress, we don't feel good. Part of that progress is doing stuff that doesn't jive with our identity. And then eventually we grow that identity. How do you get people to take that fearful step and not sabotage themselves?
Yeah, well, I think you got to understand the bigger player here, which is that self-sabotage exists and it's related to your old identity. So what I've found to be true is there are two different ways for you to, transform your subconscious so that you have new identities, you have new beliefs, you have new stories you tell yourself, and then you can create ones that are more empowering, more inspiring, more supportive of the person you want to be, right? So that is the process of getting rid of self-sabotage. You've got to get rid of that old identity that's creating the self-sabotage in the first place. So the two ways that I found that you can create subconscious transformation are first, and I guess this is the best word for it, trauma. So when you're experiencing something traumatic, then that means you have this high emotionally intense experience that then causes you in a moment to say, oh, things are different now, right? A lot of people associate trauma with negative things, but also if you win this award or you have this really inspiring psychedelics, like you can have this highly intentional and intense experience that then causes some kind of subconscious shift, right? So that's trauma, not necessarily, leaning on the negative side of what trauma means. It's just kind of like this interruptive experience. It happens in a moment, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the ways that your subconscious will transform. The second way is spaced repetition, right? Consistency is key. The more that you take action doing a certain thing, the more you're going to be affirming the new identity that you're looking to cultivate, right? And that's where if you want to become a certain person, you can reverse engineer becoming that person by taking consistent action in ways that are congruent with the identity of that person. But you're bringing up a great point, which is how do you take action through the self-sabotage, right? So it's like you've got to be aware of the self-sabotage and you've got to be so committed to it and acting through it. And that's what you did as an entrepreneur, is even though every single corner of your being was saying, stop, you suck, you don't know what you're doing, you kept going, and your actions proved that voice of self-sabotage wrong. You were able to overcome it until you're consistently acting in congruence with a new identity, allowed that identity become your predominant identity versus the old one that was trying to hold you back, right? And that's from a tactical level. That's like the first thing that I do on a coaching level is I teach people to become from an identity level to be self-disciplined, is having a growth mindset, right? So once you can really cultivate the habit of being self-disciplined, which is making the right choice when you know there's a choice to be made, is all self-discipline is. And you do that consistently despite circumstances. That's, extra caveats and conditions to it. But once you build that core response pattern within self-discipline, you can then apply that to all of the other challenges that you're experiencing in life, which allows you to slowly mold your other identities in different parts of your life to be congruent with the person you want to be, right? So it's building that infrastructure, that core framework. I found it's most important to build that habit of self-discipline, which is associated with the growth mindset, to then be able to kind of be the lead domino to the rest of the positive habits that serve you.
Yeah, self-discipline. And what it sounds like is saying is you want to outwork your old identity, right? Mm-hmm. You want to, you do it to the point to where you become undeniable with so much repetition. There's a book called Predictably Unpredictable, I think is the name of it. And they were talking about this is, we're social creatures, right? Whenever we see a large line, and I know this from my food business days, is when you see a large line, the intelligent thing would be to go into the short line, but everyone goes into the long line because there's obviously value here. We need social proof, social creatures. Well, that not only happens in the present moment, that actually happens at a sync at a time. And what it means by that is every single time, let's just say you saw a Starbucks and you waited in line to go into Starbucks, you now have a mental cue of you previously waiting in line at Starbucks. And then you go back to that no, and then there's a second version of me that's done it before, and then a third, and then a fourth, until finally I have an identity of somebody who goes to Starbucks over time. And so you're saying to kind of apply that in the situation where you can just outwork it by just say, okay, first get that self-discipline so I can get that repetition. I get that repetition that will then break even if I do self-sabotage or even if I do those things, this is someone I do regardless of the output. It's more about that process and me being and willing to do that process than necessarily the result of that process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's spot on. I love that example. And it reminds me of kind of two more common ways to relate with it, which is fake it till you make it, right? Like you do the things until you become the person. And that relates to the second version, which is overcome until you become, right? You overcome the challenge, the obstacle, until you become capable of defeating it, which is because at a subconscious level, you've shifted to be above it. Just, that's your new normal.
I have not heard that one yet. So that's going to be going into this. It's going to go into my Rolodex of my brain. And so I appreciate that. Overcome till you become. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So much of that is that identity. And I think it's so interesting. And what's also interesting is I'm going to share with you one improvement hack, because we're talking about self-improvement here on this topic. I please take it, go for it. I stole it. And I'll tell you where I got it from, but it's something that you're talking about. The other half of this was trauma. What is a trauma? There is something that happens that is so intense, right, that it now owns space in your brain, and anything that's now associated with that, you can then is now attached to, right? So with virtual reality, because I have a lot of experience in that space, you do virtual exposure therapy and you desensitize yourself to something over time by exposing yourself to a virtual spider. And then it gets more and more scary and more realistic until finally you desensitize. So that's working it backwards from the trauma. Now there's other ones, which you mentioned, psychedelics, right? And that's the thing, I was talking to someone previously about, is why is it we need to go do a bucket of ayahuasca in the jungles of Peru to get, humanity, we are all one. You can get that on Instagram while scrolling. You're not going to be this. It's not going to hit you the same way when you're 3 cups into ayahuasca and you're in the jungles and you can barely hold on to reality with one fingernail, right? It's different because you're already at that peak state, and then you introduce that information, and that intensity of the trauma sticks with you and hooks with you. So I recently heard about this, another way to do anchoring. So NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, or things that, let's look at Pavlov's dog, right? If everyone's not familiar with Pavlov's dog, there was a hungry dog, and then you'd feed the dog food, and then you'd ring the bell, and you'd have stimuli associated with the action, which causes a physiological change. The dog would drool. So now you then remove the dog bowl over so many repetitions, and now when you ring the bell, the dog drools anyways, right? So we understand that as a core concept. So someone talked about doing this type of anchoring, but doing a type of what we call is olfactory anchoring. And so what they did is saying, okay, instead of just imagining a peak state, imagine a peak state, and then hit your chest and go, yes, imagine it. And you hit your state, yes, right? Very Tony Robbins, peak state. We're familiar with that, right? That's what that looks like. So what this guy did, I think it was Jordan Belfort, The Way of the Wolf from the book. I got this from his book, and I'm going to try this. I haven't done it yet, but my plan is to do this. He was talking about this in the process of sales or any of the situations. He goes, okay, instead of trying to imagine a situation and hitting your chest and say yes, right, that, what you need some sort of dramatic stimuli that's super intense, and it's also got to hit you right at the peak of the peak. Both those things need to be true. You got to be at the peak of the emotion, and then you have to have a really intense sound or something to associate the two together. So what he did, and what he does now, is when he does sales, and when he hits a peak sales moment, right? Right when you get that sales moment, or you game-winning touchdown, or whatever the thing might be, and you're at that peak, he brings with him one of those boom boom sticks. Are you familiar with the boom boom stick? So a boom boom stick, for anybody that doesn't know, it looks like lipstick, but it's a really intense, specific smell, and you put it in your nose and you take a whiff of it. And so what he does olfactory anchoring. So he does that, puts it in his nose, lands a big sales deal, pulls that thing out, brings it into his nose, goes, yes, right? Waits a couple seconds and then does it again. So then when he needs to get back in that peak state, you're never going to have that same smell again. It's very hard to replicate. You now anchored it at a peak moment in time. It's something that's super small that you can order on Amazon for like $20 for 3 different flavors, put it in your pocket. And then when you're ready to go anchor that peak moment, you can do it that way. I was actually thinking about doing a psychedelics later at some point in time, right? And just anchor that moment in and then pull that back out to get back into it. But what are your thoughts around that?
Sounds like Jordan Belfort to me. I mean, I totally believe it. You're right. No, I mean, it's like, you talk about the habit loop. I got Atomic Habits somewhere in my bookshelf behind me.
Oh.
And it's all about, it's trigger, craving, response, and then reward, right? So it's all about like, how do you attach the reward and the gratification you get from doing something to the initial moment, like Pavlov's dog, which is the bell to cause salivation, right? It's like the more that you can connect the thing that brings your awareness to the opportunity to receive the award and the high emotional experience of the reward, the closer the connection that can be. I mean, from what I know about habit formation, it makes a lot of sense. And it's it's something that I'd be curious for you to check back to me with that to see how that goes for you.
I'll let you know, man. I'm not saying it. Here's the thing. I'm always sampling different things, right? We go through and we learn things. I get people on the podcast. I get inspired. Now I'm up in the morning taking cold showers because I had another doing the podcast that got me into that whole jam. And so I'm doing this type of stuff. But I try on these different identities and these habits and see which ones stick. For yourself, like, what are things for you that you now do that is a daily habit or a way of life that you've consciously or unconsciously integrated to improve yourself?
Oh, dude. I mean, so let me ask you a question. I'll get into that. So So with your like iteration self-improvement process, how do you measure progress? Like what's your way to kind of know, hey, is this working? Is this helping? Is this not? Like what is your measuring stick for some of that stuff?
For myself, it's twofold. So sometimes it's just, can I just get the reps in, and I'll make a concerted effort to do it over a series of months, and I'll be just like a part of time of a challenge. And then if I keep doing it after that, it's cool. And I'm just trying to look for the reps. Like podcast, I gamified it. My gamification is to get to 1,000. Doesn't really, it's part of the story and the narrative. But to me, it's like, do I get those reps in? And that's one of it. I mean, the other one is, do I feel like it has a net positive impact on my something, say psyche, right? So I get up and I do journaling in the morning. And that to me, I feel has a positive impact. And I can tell that when I get into situations where I need to work something out, I go and I do that activity and I feel good from it. So I think part of it is the process and just me just counting the reps because it's gamified. And then other ones are the emotional reward, or if I feel like I need to go do something, I have that as a tool in my tool belt to shake something loose.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So it sounds like it's qualitative and it's kind of implicit, right? So it's something that you're coming upon some subjective measure for, which then, you do that enough times, you kind of can start recognizing patterns about, oh, this leads to that. And you kind of iterate from that more like subjective lens.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a habit gatherer. I try to go, what works, right? So what about you?
Yeah. So no, the reason I asked that is because my core keystone habit, and this is what I teach in the coaching alongside the habit of self-discipline, is what I call your self-improvement scorecard. So I also gamify my personal development. But every single night, without fail, I've been doing it for almost a decade, I go and I report on key categories in my life so I can make sure I was accountable to doing certain things. I have those qualitative measures about like, oh, what was my energy like today? How productive was I today? How consistent with my schedule was I today? So I can start having real data that I can pull trends and patterns from over different timestamps, right? Because your implicit process, that kind of biases and memory isn't perfect over time. So you have this general impression of how it works. But when you have it documented and standardized, that's what I found is able to really accelerate the incorporation of new positive habits. And then, especially if something's not performing as you want it to. For example, right now, I'm trying to get my energy levels up in the middle of the day. I just noticed that morning I feel great. Kind of noon to 5, I get a little tired and I kind of pick back up in the evening. Is it diet? Is it hydration? Is it my sleep? What is it? So, kind of you can start isolating variables. And since I have this scorecard in place, I can see what's going on. And what I've been able to do to combat that is I've just incorporated an energy management routine where I do some breath work, I do some gratitude, and I dance for a minute. And I'm like, cool, that like gets me fired up and I'm ready to go. And it took me a little bit to figure out that combo. And now I'm seeing that my energy levels are lifting in the middle of the day. And I'm developing this association of, oh, I'm feeling down. What can I do? And I have a lower barrier to entry to getting into a peak energetic state because I've already determined my kind of recovery sequence, which is my energy management ritual, right? So that's how I think about, like you're talking about this implicit or kind of unconscious way that I think about my personal development. It's really in the scorecard.
How do you, okay, so that's great. A couple of questions there. It's funny too. So when you had the scorecard, because I was using the Atomic Habits habit journal for a while where I check those things off, and I switched from that, and now I use an app, right? And I have an app that at the end of the night, I try to track it. I'm not 100% consistent. I don't think I'm at your level, and I don't do what you do around like looking at my score at the end of the time. What is that cadence? Because I think it's very difficult to be both the dungeon master and the player in the game of life. And so I'm currently working the system as the player. I have a hard time switching out and being that dungeon master. What does that process look like for you to review your scorecard? Is it weekly, monthly? Can you talk me through that?
It's all the above. Yeah. So,
Okay.
I mean, I have daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly review practices. Like these are routines that I have in place so that I have kind of a standard way of observing my behavior, right? So, and I try not to be emotionally attached to certain results. It's me being able to observe and reflect to say, hey, what worked and what didn't. So, by having time specifically carved out to be the dungeon master versus the player, right? That allows me to put on that different hat and to figure out exactly how this is working for me.
Do you previously schedule it out? Like you have like every month on the first, and like, because I noticed that for myself, I think in blocks of weeks, and then those blocks of week are fairly easy to get down as consistent patterns, but monthly or quarterly or those ones, it's a little harder to find ways to sneak those in because it kind of messes with the overall weekly flow.
Yep, totally. So it's about setting the intention of this is what I'm hoping to accomplish, you know? So I hope to do it at the beginning of every month. And I have my own productivity systems and scheduling systems so that run as part of what I call my self-improvement operating system to bring my awareness to, oh, we are coming up close to the new month. This is going to take me 2 hours. And now I can put that in my schedule and build around it in terms of the different things that I'm signing myself up for or commitments that I'm making, you know? So I have these different systems in place that help me to bring the awareness that I need to then practice that habit of self-discipline to then take action on the things that are most important to me, right? So it's this very kind of cohesive process where the mindset piece needs to be there in order to follow through on the things that are most important. And then that mindset, self-discipline requires that you have awareness of what's happening. So how do I create moments of awareness? And that's what my scorecard does. I habit stack things on my scorecard as a trigger for me to follow through on it. But then also I have different scheduling practices and time management practices and these different kind of protocols in place that help me to get into these other activities, which then serve to, I guess, fuel the core mechanism, which is a scorecard in my own effort, So it's very integrated in the way that I approach it. But it's also, it's an intention, right? So it's not like it's on the 1st at 8 p.m. every single time. It's like, okay, cool. I'd like to do it on the 1st, but this is what my day's throwing at me now. And I keep my, I have my schedule every single day right here with me. And I've got, this time, 1 hour allocated for us to chat, which is great, right? I actually gave us a half hour extra just because I've learned over time, as I study my schedule every single day, I want to make sure I'm not planning on doing something critical beyond a call like this, right? Yeah. So I have my systems, which is part of my feedback loop that I do on a weekly basis and a daily basis to reflect on, oh yeah, I've noticed that podcast interviews might go a little long and I don't want to feel rushed at the end of it. So let me just budget an extra half hour. And that's been my right cadence, right? So it's all about having the intention to do certain things, realizing that that's the theory. When you put it into practice, you're going to need to be adaptable. But if you have, like you said, enough architecture and constraints in place, you can be creative within those constraints. And that's kind of my best balance that I strike through my own personal development systems.
I love that. And self-improvement operating system. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Might be the title of this podcast on this one, by the way. So what I'm curious about too is I've noticed sometimes I have an intention. People have intentions, right? It's the beginning of the year. I'm gonna lose 1 million pounds or whatever the intention might be for what they got. What's your checks and balances? I think for me, checks and balances is super important. So you have an intention to do it, say the 1st of the month, and then you miss it. How do you recatch it? Are you looking at your planning and then say, okay, oh, I was supposed to do it, and then you grab that and you bring it back down, or what does that look like?
Yeah, for that example in particular, let's say monthly review February 1st, right? Yeah. I have it on my calendar. For whatever reason, I don't do it. The way that my task management system, which is its own system of being able to assign urgencies and priorities and connection points, timelines to different things, I have systems in place where it's, if I don't do it, then it's represented in my task management system a certain way. In my case, it's called overdue. And then when I go to filling my calendar, I have an SOP. I have a process to say, this is my process for filling my calendar. The first thing I look at are my overdues because they're beyond deadline, right? So that's how that becomes a priority again, just built into the nature of how I've organized my task management system, my scheduling protocols, right? And that's how it's all integrated. It's your task management talks to your schedule. Your schedule is your moment of awareness. I call it a trigger multiplier, right? Because your schedule is triggering you. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm supposed to do. So your schedule is your trigger multiplier for you then to make a decision in the moment. I intended to do this podcast interview for this hour and a half, right? But what if something came up? What if my house caught on fire? I'll make a decision in the moment. Oh, sorry, Dylan, got to bounce. Something else more important. I still have the power to make the right decision in the moment, but now I have a reference point to bounce all of that off of because I've been able to establish my intention and plan in advance. So it holds me more accountable to the unemotional plan that I set. Meanwhile, I'm making emotional decisions in the moment, and it helps me to stay more in alignment with myself because it's the Stoic philosophy, right? I'm trying to take action in integrity with my best self and, resist the influence of emotions, tired, hungry, horny, whatever, right? That might bias your logical mind in the moment.
Yeah, man, the Stoics had it right. You want to talk about an amazing operating system back in the day. Was that ability to not let anything too low hit you, let nothing too high hit you, and to try to be that ultimate form of yourself, which is incredible. Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of sense. So then, and that's that balance, because there's a part of that when you're starting to talk about, I could feel inner self that wants to be free and doesn't want any schedule whatsoever going, no, right? At the same time, I also know it's like working out or anything else. I know by doing that activity, I'm going to feel good. I'm going to have awareness. I'm going to have clarity. I'm going to have certainty, which increases my confidence, my self-worth, my self-belief, knowing that I can do those activities. So it's a striking that balance between having enough structure that you can then type it loose, enough structure that you can actually then be able to feel free to move in it, knowing that you have a system that's going to catch anything that falls through the cracks.
Sure.
That's super cool.
And everyone's tolerance for that structure is different, right? For me, I've done enough iterations of my own evaluation of, how good did I feel today? I know that there's a direct association with how productive I was versus how good I felt, right? So I'm on the high side of like being more productive. So that's why I have half-hour time blocks of what I want to be doing with enough wiggle room to figure out how do I fulfill those things. But someone else, maybe their best balance isn't quite so rigid. And it's once you make a schedule, and in this example, it's once you make a schedule, you think about it to say, oh, did this work for me? How did I feel? Then you change your process so that it arrives at what works best for you instead of just taking it out of a box. And that's the next step. Like, this is also in my coaching, but that's the next step. When people get into positive habits, they think that they're there. Like, great, I raise my standards. I'm in good habits. I am perfect. I'm great. It's like, that's the starting line. When you're in good habits, then sure, you have the infrastructure in place. It's about optimization beyond that. The more that you figure out how those habits can serve you and are meant to serve you, and you get the feedback and you make the tweaks and adjustments and you change your environment, you change your associations, you set boundaries, right? You do all these different things that affect the way that you spend your time. That helps you to arrive at that highly optimized you, which is ultimately you fulfilling your potential.
Love that. So then you're saying you're not a slave to your emotions. You're using your emotions as a guide to get into more optimized and congruent sets. So it's not that you're necessarily rejecting them, not necessarily letting them dominate you, but you have enough where you can kind of stay in the pocket, but using them as a signal, but not using it as a master control switch.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately it's about happiness, right? Like, I'm optimizing around how can I be as happy as possible. So I need to allow emotions to be a voice in my decisions. But I also know that ice cream makes me really happy. But in 2 months, if I had ice cream every single day to be happy in the moment, I would be less happy. Right. Yeah. So that's the balance in terms of how it affects you.
Yeah, that is, because there is different types of, I mean, and also we kind of confuse happiness with comfort, you know, and because it can be pleasure is not necessarily happiness. And they're very like subtly confusing words, like the word love can be confusing. So so we talked about coaching. Primarily, what kind of coaching do you do? Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I call it, and you can probably hear it, the one word, I guess I have said the word, but I call it intentional living. Like, the coaching that I do is I help people live as intentionally as possible, which means it's in alignment of the person that they want to be, their best self, their fulfilled potential, their maximized capabilities. And ultimately, the person that I'm most interested to support is someone who knows that supporting themselves and maximizing their processes, their energy, their productivity, their love in service of the world. So they have some larger thing they're trying to tap into and support with their effort. They're purpose driven. Those are the people that I'm really inspired to work with. Right. And so what I do is I help them live as intentionally as possible, meaning, what are your tolerances? What are your expectations? How much exercise do you think you want? Let's get in it. Let's start getting really intentional and aware of how much this is serving you, in what capacities. You have your different measuring points in place so that you can start adjusting and steering yourself toward that more optimized life that is your best self, that is what you enjoy most, that is who you want to be. So that's where I have the core resources and infrastructure I'm sharing with the scorecard and the self-improvement operating system and the habit of self-discipline and the weekly review processes. I have all of that in place because it works for a certain type of person, right? But I found that that's just a great infrastructure that anyone can plug into to say, okay, cool, I can become better with this awareness, with these tools. So I help people in being able to actually install that operating system to be able to use those tools reliably, not just have them, but to use them well, so that you can start making data-driven decisions around what works best for you.
That's awesome. Yeah. And there's one thing to have the operating system. Another one is to actually use it and run it. And that's a good point. Like, 'cause sometimes you give people, I know, 'cause like I build software and I know that part of the things that they don't factor for is, here's the software, here's your application. And they're like, great, And then they never use it, never apply it, never integrate it, never build it. And their life would be so much easier, better, faster, stronger if they used it. But part of that is you kind of need to kind of work with them through the kinks, which is mentorship, right? Which is that this is how you use the tool.
Yep.
And so I love that. So you're creating a structure for them to kind of then take, okay, how do they consciously, intentionally optimize for who they want to be and how they want to fill? And then you have a system and a process and a structure for being able to optimize for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's practical in design too, right? And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, so you can have the tool. Are you going to use it? It's like, that's where self-discipline comes in, because you will take action, you'll prioritize this. And like, despite circumstances, right? I was talking about the emotions of things. That's despite circumstances. Like, you've committed to this, you know, it's going to serve you. You're not going to, you know, have ice cream every single night, whatever it might be. But that's why discipline and that habit of making the right choice when you know there's a choice to be made is the first step, because then you can get yourself to use these things that are all in your environment meant to serve you. And that's where, you know, it's practical intentionality, because what I also do is I get really realistic about, like I said, the core process of, you have your self-improvement operating system and your scorecard. From there, you can habit stack your scheduling routine, because you're looking at your scorecard already. You have that moment of awareness saying, oh, now it's time for me to schedule, which then becomes your trigger multiplier for you to gain awareness throughout your day about what you're meant to be doing, right? So it's all of this integrated strategy that needs to be built one layer on top of each other. And I call it kind of like your maximum fulfillment pyramid, because you have your keystone habit, your base layer, you grow your productivity on top of that, you grow your habits and your standards on top of that, you grow your optimization on top of, right? So you have to kind of like work your way up and have the core infrastructure and resources and habits and routines and skills in place to be able to then, you know, slowly creep toward the top of that pyramid, which is your fulfilled potential.
I love that. Yeah, and so you're building the infrastructure so that they can optimize their pyramid or their full potential.
Right.
Let me ask you a question with this is, and it's related, but it is also a segue, is a lot of this is about optimizing yourself and creating a structure and really being able to live at your full potential. Now, you also have a for-purpose social impact agency, which I thought was super unique. I went and checked it out, and I thought I was very inspired about how to get people up and running. What parts of this system? Because I can feel, as someone who is relate with you on the growth mindset, Kaizen, constant improvement, and figuring out what systems and structures and how do I optimize myself like I'm a business, being my best business self. So what about those things did you transplant over to for purpose, and if any, and what is that? How do those two worlds relate?
Well, I just laugh because you made like a certain triangle hand shape. So if you think of the pyramid of self-improvement, which comes to a point, that point then touches your upside down pyramid of impact.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it's once you get into your maximum potential, and it's to serve the world, it's to make a difference.
Oh, I get it. An hourglass kind of shape.
So it's an hourglass, exactly.
Yeah.
So what you do is you build your own self. The best thing that you can do for the world is to make sure you're taken care of, because then you can show up better for your mission, for your family, for the things that are most important to you. So you invest in being able to optimize your energy. So the 3 pillars that I have in my scorecard are energy, productivity, and love. You optimize your energy so that you be present and you're not restricted by, you know, your ability to focus. Your productivity systems to make sure that you have, bless you, to make sure that you have all of the right things in your calendar, so you're taking the right actions. And then your love, so that you're not losing touch with the people that are most important to you. That is your emotional center of these people, right? So you get all these things working, you optimize them. Then once you reach that max potential, that ultimate fulfillment of your potential, what is it for? And you can ask any millionaire or billionaire, I guess it's not impressive to be a millionaire anymore, any billionaire out there who has made a bunch of money, and they'll tell you that the best thing that they did was they gave it all away, or they put it to work in service of other people, because that's what really feels good. That's what life's about. That's what they've discovered. When everything else is accounted for, that's really what means the most to them. So that's why you get to that max potential where you are financially free and you have energy freedom. Then you can flip that pyramid into your impact, and you can start making a difference. It's not that you have to be fully, you know, self-actualized in order to make a difference, right? But that's kind of how the pyramid flips, because there is a purpose for it, and it meets when, you know, the tops, you know, the points of the pyramids meet in the middle of that hourglass.
Yeah, I love it. And I've noticed that there's two things that come in mind for this. Well, multiple things. We're gonna take this in order. So first of all, it's that you first need to be selfish before you can be selfless,
100%.
right? And I think a lot of people, from what I've noticed, is there's this. I'm sure there's a term for it. Is that people want to bypass the selfish part and they want to go right to the selfless, right? Because it's easier. It's easier to be of service to people around them. But then what happens is things will suck them away. They'll go to fill up somebody else's cup, but they'll have nothing left in their cup, right? And so I've had friends, people that I've known that really want to be service to other people, but they're not taking care of themselves, and they get super sick, they get super unhealthy, they get super whatever it is, and then all of a sudden they get really bitter that they're taking care of all these other people, not themselves. And I've seen people that like start in nonprofits and then just get run dry and then go into Wall Street or just go into someplace completely different. And I feel like that order is incorrect. Is it's very difficult to be of service to the people if you have nothing to give to them. It's that selfless king kind of attitude. And so have you seen that where people try to skip that step and try to first be of service without filling themselves up and then sliding back down? Or what are your thoughts around that?
It happens every single time because people are well intended. They're good people. They want to make a difference. They're really inspired. They care about the people in their lives. They care about the causes on their heart. They have a mission, and they think that that's a priority over themselves. When again, like you said, selfish before you can be selfless. The best thing that you can do for the causes, missions, impact that you care about is to take care of yourself first. And people skip that because that worthiness piece is one of them. Like you're projecting and you're kind of extrinsically relating with your environment in order to kind of get your back scratched and to feel okay about yourself. You need that validation from other people, right? So that's where the worthiness comes in. But also it's just like, it seems like the logical thing to do. It because that's what feels better is when you're of service. But you can't be of sustainable service until you're self-sustaining. And so you're exactly right. Like, and that's, I work with, purpose-driven entrepreneurs and, nonprofit leaders. And these are the conversations we have, which is, do you know what's the best thing for you to show up better for your mission? Let's not talk about the other players in your life. The best thing for your work is for you to be taken care of. Like your work is always going to involve your personal life and yourself. You are the one stepping into the work. So how can you actually stop working at 5 p.m. and completely check out and do so without guilt because you got so much done during the day and you know that now you're filling your cup back up to be able to pour it out the next day? And how much more can you pour every single day when you fill up instead of just, trying to use whatever you have left? So that's the core education and conversation I try and have with people in the impact sector, because I think we can change the world if the people that are already doing the work are on fire. Like once they're on fire, these problems will be solved. But people are pouring with empty cups. And that's where I want to remind people, you've got to fill yourself up. You've got to optimize your life, your energy, your productivity, your love. Take care of yourself first. Be selfish first before you really share everything you have with the mission, because you'll have more to share if you take care of yourself. You're muted.
Don't know what happened there, but okay, we're back. So 100%, I completely agree with what you're talking about there. Is this capacity, this power, this way of being that by taking care of yourself, whether it's your body or your mindset or your relationships or whatever's going on with you, you've got so many RPMs. And over time, if you just grind that thing out, you tend to slow down over time. And that's why I've been doing, it's so funny, like one of my challenges for this year was a midday recharge, which is mid-afternoon, which is a little meditation halfway through and a little microdose. So that's my thing. I'm doing yoga nidra, a little microdose, do it for about 40 minutes, get back into it, ready, set, go. Let's go. Right. And it works. It's amazing for myself. And this is my own pattern of behavior. But what happens is, like, I noticed that I would go from 100 miles an hour at 5 a.m. all the way down to trying to grind things out at 5 p.m. And I just can't. And I needed to take that time. Otherwise I'd be useless. And then I'd get very victim-y. I'd have no capacity. Someone would say something, I'd get all snappy or like, you don't know how hard I work or whatever the kind of thing is. And so when I take that rest, I come back, it's like any negativity or hits me, it kind of just bounces off me. It's like, bink. I'm like, hey, hope you're having a great day. Sorry you're mad. Let's keep going, everybody. So, and that's at least what I've noticed with myself is it's necessary. So I want to talk about this though too, can you describe to me what your social impact model is, how it works, why is it different? Because I think that's pretty unique, and I want to touch on that as well.
Yeah, so it's probably different than what you're seeing on the website too. We're redoing it right now, but basically, so our social impact agency, what we do is we build movements that shake the world. So we identify cause areas that we can impact. We go and diagnose them, figure out what is the most high leverage way that you can actually impact this. For example, we have a campaign called Burpees for Vets, where we have completely revolutionized the veteran space, and we've taken the conversation away from suicide, homelessness, substance abuse, and we've created one that's more empowering in a conversation about wellness and empowerment. And with the right resources, veterans can be leaders that continue to excel in their civilian lives, right? So what we've done is we've found this cause area that we could disrupt from an impact standpoint, but then we've created a vehicle that invites people in to participate. And just like personal development, social impact, it's so important to understand what are the objections or what are the barriers to entry that people are experiencing. People don't know where to donate. They don't know what to support. They don't know how to vet it. They don't know, there's all these different objections, which paralyzes people. So what we do is we create movements with a single call to action that's built around a specific interest. For veterans, it's called Burpees for Vets. So it's a fitness challenge where we have people in the fitness space who have the intention to get involved in supporting on Veterans Day and they don't know how. It's like, cool. All you got to do is you fundraise. And for every dollar you fundraise, you do a burpee on Veterans Day. It's going to be a crazy fitness challenge. The money goes directly to 5 hand-selected nonprofits in the veteran transition space who are addressing the highest leverage opportunity for impact in XYZ ways. And this is your solution to getting involved in Veterans Day, feeling like you're doing something meaningful. You put it on a plate and they say, cool, sign me up. I'm doing it. Instead of, okay, I want to do something for Veterans Day. I don't know who to support. And man, it sounds like a lot of work to kind of set up a fundraiser and then nothing happens, right? So we create this universal vehicle that we can then customize for different entry points depending on people's interests. But at least we have the core infrastructure so that people can step into it and materialize their intention to follow through on action. That's my personal mission statement. And I'm talking a lot about intentionality. My mission statement is turning human intention into action. That's within your own health and habits and the best version of yourself. Or that could be in the difference that you want to make in the world, materializing that into something that's tangibly impacting a cause that you care about, right? So that's what I would say is like, that's okay. So to answer your question, that's what we do is we build these vehicles where we allow people to plug in, get involved in a meaningful way where their contribution matters and it's within their interests already. And then we amplify that and we scale it across thousands of people to be able to create incredible ripples for that cause.
That's awesome. So what you're doing in my own terminology of what I understand is you're viewing a nonprofit and okay, how can we create this nonprofit and streamline the nonprofit so that we can create a unified action and activity that is simple, easy to understand, and with very low friction to get into, so that someone says, okay, I want to support this cause. There's not 37 different ways to do it. You have one way to do it. It's simple. Anyone can do it. And you just follow these easy 1, 2, 3 steps and you can contribute and make a meaningful impact. And so you're removing the clutter and the confusion out of contributing and supporting one mission for each of these movements, for each of these nonprofits or impact companies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly right. The one could say is it's not that we optimize around one nonprofit. We actually found that causes are better addressed when there's collaboration between nonprofits. So our vehicles support multiple nonprofits because that's part of a more holistic and comprehensive solution. And we also find that the consumer, the end user, they're happier to contribute to multiple nonprofits because then they're diversifying their risk of, are these all legit nonprofits, right? So you're meeting people where they're at in terms of where their psychology is and their interest to get involved. So we do that vetting for them so they're confident that, okay, my dollar and the people I'm bringing into this, their dollars are going to be of maximum benefit because it's going to the vetted cause. Plus, this is how I get involved, which is very clear. So yeah, that second half you had spot on.
I love it. Yeah. And I appreciate the correction. This is awesome. Because what you're talking about, it's one of my fundamental truths, because we're going back and forth here, is one of humans' greatest superpowers is to use technology to collaborate through space and time. Right. And we're talking about this is our ability to collaborate. Like, we suck. You put us in the jungle individually, we suck. But you put us all together, pushing in the same direction, dominate the planet. And what I love about that is not just one nonprofit. You're making a coalition of nonprofits, but we say, hey guys, we're not all going to play by 75 different rules, right? You're the Genghis Khan of these nonprofits, right? You're unifying all of them, bringing them all together and saying, we're going this way. And this is how we're going to do it. And I'm going to make it very simple. One movement at a time, one direction. But then everybody wins together though.
Exactly.
So which is beautiful. I love it.
The sum of the whole is greater than this, the individual parts.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Synergy is the way to freedom. Yeah, I totally agree. So with all this, right? I mean, I'm sensing a lot of intentionality in your life. That's something I don't know if you got that, but
very observant.
Yeah. All right. Dong. So what I'm seeing though is there's a lot of this intentionality. You put a lot of time and effort. Obviously, seems to be an obsession of yours, which I absolutely love. And you're doing it in multiple different ways. You're saying, okay, how can I be the best self of myself? How do I have this message? How do I learn and grow with this message? And then how do I spread this system that I've created to other people, both in the coaching practice and impact spaces? What is your holy grail? Like, what is the flag in the sand? What do you hope to achieve with all of this effort and intentionality?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I'll have to journal on this to get a better answer. But what's first coming to me is it's all about making a difference in the world. Like, I have this massive vision for how I can help bring incredible transformation to the well-being of the people on the planet and animals that are living, that are existing in this world. And I don't know if it's because I was raised with a silver spoon and I'm just extremely naive, but it's gotten me this far and it feels so good to do that. I wake up inspired because I know that I'm building toward that 2040, 2050 version of myself that is leading movements and leading the charge and helping people who are suffering to alleviate their pain and to inspire them. And I think that we can do it one person at a time. You get one person fired up, you get one nonprofit operating to its highest capacity. You do that across tens, hundreds, millions of people. Now you're doing something. Now you're making ripples. Now you're changing the world. So that's my flag in the sand. That's my North Star. Is I want to maximize the difference that I can inspire or contribute to in my life. And there's a longer backstory as to why related to, my grandpa's legacy. And it lights me up. I sit at his desk every single day and I look at his memorial above my desk, and it's just kind of the fire that keeps me going. Yeah.
Do you have a 60-second or 2-minute elaboration on that?
Sure. Yeah. So my grandpa is my hero. So let's land the plane. So my grandpa is my hero because he excelled in circumstances where I feel most insecure or like I feel less capable, like the least capable of succeeding. So basically, he was raised in a single room home in the Bronx. He was the youngest of 7 children. He never really met his dad. His mom was sick his entire childhood. He was raised on the streets of the Bronx. And somehow, some way, he earned a full ride scholarship to Harvard, where he played 2 sports, basketball and baseball, earned a Fulbright scholarship after graduating summa cum laude, went to South America to study the way that oil was being used and like the taxes, and discovered that it was very corrupt, received death threats. Then he was like, well, I'm in South America. What should I do? Coffee's a thing here. Let me study coffee. He helped to bring coffee to the Americas. He created store brand coffee, kind of like the Kroger's, whatever, the store brand. So he brought that concept of South American coffee to the States, where it ended up being white labeled as store brands. And he was able to scale across consumer goods in the States and build an incredible legacy and foundation of wealth for my family that I get to benefit from. So it was being able to overcome the incredibly difficult circumstances of being in the Bronx without real like parental guidance, to then make a life for himself and then to build a legacy and infrastructure for generations to benefit. Like, that's something that I just am extremely inspired about.
That's beautiful, man. So you almost feel like what I'm hearing you say is feel indebted to pay back all of the good that you've received and kind of do right by your grandfather, your hero, your ancestor, and saying, hey, I've gotten so much, and you kind of like overwhelmed with it. You're trying to just pay that forward and pay that outward.
Exactly it. Yeah. The way I call it is kind of like with my privilege that I've just inherited by the lottery of luck. I want to do as much with that platform as I can, which is why I want to see exactly how far I can take this with my ambition in making a difference. And that's why I've centered around this core philosophy, which is get people on fire so that they can then be unstoppable in the causes they care most about, to then bring other people with them to be on fire and change the world even further.
Love that. So if that's the mission, right, is to have this 20, 40, 20, 50 version of yours, creating movements and massive ripples all over the world with this change and positive impact for good, what's the dragon? What's the thing that's so difficult to overcome that you might need to transform who you are to get to what you want to get to?
Yeah. I've been fighting with this. So 2022 was a year where I fought my dragon, and my dragon's still there, but now I know the dragon's there. I didn't even know I had an adversary, and now I've been able to identify the adversary. And it's not going to make sense, but it's my entitlement. Like
Okay.
like my dragon, it's myself, of course. I think for everyone, it's always themselves. For me, it was my entitlement. And, I had this inherited privilege and this platform and this silver spoon, in my life. And anytime something was broke, someone was there to fix it. Or anytime something didn't work, someone was there to make it better. And I was kind of raised in this environment where I got a lot of what I needed. And that translated into me not being as resilient as I needed to be, or as strong as I thought I was. And that's why, my grandpa inspires me so much, is because he was resilient. He was strong. But so that's my dragon. My dragon is overcoming by no fault of my own, but these kind of identities and these beliefs and these kind of comforts of my upbringing, which are keeping me from taking action through the self-sabotage or the adversity that I know is best for my cause and my best self.
That's beautiful, man. It's that I love it. I mean, and one, thank you for sharing that. It's very personal. It's very vulnerable, and I think it's beautiful that to acknowledge that, and also to recognize, our gaps. It's so easy to talk about our strengths and how awesome we are, and so forth and so on. But there's that weakness in us, even like in me too, where I've had certain things easy and given to me that I'm fighting that inner piece in me that just wants it comfortable, that wants it given, that wants that comfortable road. And it's beautiful that you can acknowledge that. Yeah, I think your grandpa would be proud, brother. Like that's very cool. I love that.
That's what I'm trying to do. That was the last thing I would have said, is I want to make him proud. Yeah. So, and I'll continue to earn it. Like I feel like he is proud, but I'm still at it.
I love that, man. I think it's so cool, dude. I feel you on that. Like I often try to live up to my dad. My dad was like a hippie, had a beautiful family, grew things like that. Just built a beautiful community of people around him. And I often try to do things to make him proud, right? And I think there's that grind of wanting to honor the effort that they put to create a space for us to be who we are.
100%.
Yeah.
Beautiful, man.
So with that being said, brother, it's awesome to have you on the show. I know we've gone a little over. I appreciate you budgeting for some more time here. Is there anything else you'd like to let people know about before you tell them how to get a hold of you?
No, I mean, I think we've covered a wide swath here. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I just encourage people to, set themselves up for success, and it's like, get help, like you aren't going to do it on your own, like you're trying to, like, I didn't slay the dragon on my own, this entitlement dragon. It's like, I gained awareness of it through mentors and masterminds and brotherhoods, like if you expect to do it on your own, you can't. So, be humble enough to know that you need help, and then go get the help that you need. Because we're better together. Just like you said, humans can take over the world and have taken over the world when they work together, but in isolation, not so much.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we're not an island. We often try to pretend that we're self-built from the ground up, no help from anybody. That's some BS there. So so if people want to get a hold of you, find out more about you, your impact space, your podcast, how do they do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's kind of two halves of the conversation, right? So the first is the personal development stuff. So Self-Improvement Daily is the name of the podcast. It's very intentional in that if you want to build the identity of a growth mindset, right? So that's where you can show up consistently. This podcast, you're teaching yourself every single day. I'm worthy of growth. I can grow. So that's what Self-Improvement Daily does. I have different programs and courses and coaching and stuff beyond that. If you do take an interest in working with me or learning more about some of the ways I can help people. And then if you have a nonprofit or a cause that's on your heart, a movement that a revolution that you're looking to bring to the world, that's what we do at For Purpose. So I would love to connect with anyone there. And you can just send me an email for either of these. The businesses are very fluid. Just, send me an email to Brian@forpurpose, FORpurpose.com if you're looking to make an impact, and I'd love to see how I might be able to support you.
Beautiful. Brian, honor and a pleasure, brother. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate you. I appreciate all the good work that you do, and I'll see you on the other side.
You too, Dylan. Yeah, much love. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes of Reality podcast. Check out heroesofreality.com for more episodes. While you're there, you can also take the Heroes Quiz to find out what kind of hero you are. Or, if you have a great story and want to be on the podcast, tell us why your hero's journey will inspire others.